The first time I understood with complete clarity that my father had spent the previous 38 years of my life waiting for the moment when he could humiliate me in front of the largest possible audience of human beings he could afford to assemble in one room was at approximately 8:14 p.m. on a Friday evening in late May at my younger brother's engagement party in the marble-floored ballroom of my parents' lakefront estate outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in front of approximately 212 people, 3 of whom were members of the United States Senate, 2 of whom were federal judges, 1 of whom was a former North Carolina governor, and the youngest of whom, at 5 years old, was my own daughter, Posey, who was sitting on my lap in a pale yellow dress and a small white cardigan, and was eating a strawberry off the small dessert plate I had been holding for her for the previous 11 minutes. The second time I understood it, with the same clarity but a different weight, was approximately 90 seconds later, when an 84-year-old woman in a navy silk dress and a single strand of cultured pearls walked through the open double doors at the east end of the ballroom, looked across the room at me from a distance of approximately 75 feet, walked toward me without stopping or speaking to anybody, and dropped, slowly and carefully, to her knees on the marble floor in front of my chair, and began to weep into both of her hands, and said, into the absolute silence that had fallen across the ballroom in the 18 seconds it had taken her to cross it, the only 7 words that have ever, in my entire life, made me believe that the man who had just publicly described me as a pathetic failure had been wrong about every single thing he had ever said about me. The 7 words were, "Oh God, they told me you died." I will get to those 7 words in a moment. I want to tell you, first, what my father had said. My father was named Halston Heatherton. He was 71 years old. He had built over the previous 48 years of his professional life the largest commercial and residential real estate development firm in the Charlotte, Mecklenburg metropolitan area. The firm was called Heatherton Capital. It was valued, at the time of the engagement party, at approximately $80 million. Every dollar of that valuation had been, by my father's own repeated public account, the product of his single-handed determination, his unblinking professional discipline, and the unwavering support of his wife of 44 years, my mother, Marguerite, who had borne him 2 sons. The older of those 2 sons was me. The younger of those 2 sons was my brother Lyndon, who was 36 years old, who was a senior vice president at Heatherton Capital, who was being engaged that evening to a 29-year-old former assistant district attorney named Genevieve Wexler Pratt, and who was, by my father's repeated public statements over the course of the previous 2 decades, the only one of his 2 sons who had inherited any meaningful portion of the qualities that had made him, my father, the man he had become. I had not, by my father's repeated public statements over the course of those same 2 decades, inherited any of those qualities. My name is Crawford Heatherton. I am 40 years old. I am, as of this Friday evening in late May, the owner-operator of a small 2-man handyman and minor renovation business serving roughly 40 residential clients in the Plaza Midwood and Noda neighborhoods of Charlotte. I had been, until about 11 years ago, a junior development associate at my father's firm. I had been promoted twice in the 4 years I had worked there. I had been, by every quarterly performance review I had ever received, an above-average employee in a department of approximately 30 people. I had also been, by my father's private weekly opinion of me during those 4 years, an embarrassment to the family name, an example of unearned advancement, and a personal disappointment to him in ways he had been comfortable expressing to me in his office on the 32nd floor of the Heatherton Capitol building in uptown Charlotte, on a wide range of Tuesday and Friday afternoons over the course of those 4 years. I had left the firm about 11 years ago. I had left because my father had told me, in his office on a Friday afternoon in early November of that year, that I had 2 choices. I could either accept a permanent reassignment to a junior administrative role in the firm's small office in Hickory, North Carolina, at a 60% reduction in salary, or I could resign. I had resigned that afternoon. I had started my handyman business about 6 months later, with $7,000 I had saved from my last year at the firm and a 2010 Ford F-15 that I had bought used from a contractor on the west side of Charlotte. I had earned, in the previous 11 years of running that business, approximately $55,000 per year. I had supported a wife, 2 daughters, and a small rental house on Thomas Avenue in Plaza Midwood on that income. I had not asked my father for money. I had not asked my brother for money. I had not, in fact, asked anybody in my family for anything in 11 years, because I had understood, by the end of the first month after I had left the firm, that the family I had been born into had been quietly waiting for me to fail at every single thing I had ever attempted, and that the only way to deprive them of the satisfaction of watching me fail was to refuse, completely and permanently, to give them any view into my life. I had given them that view that Friday evening in late May only because my brother Lyndon had personally called me, about 3 weeks before the engagement party, and had asked me, in a voice that had sounded uncomfortable in a way I had not heard in his voice in approximately 15 years, whether I would consider coming to the party. Lyndon and I had not been close. We had not, as a matter of family history, been raised to be close. We had, however, been raised together. He had been my younger brother for 36 years. He had been 4 years old when I had first been allowed to push him on the swings in the backyard of the house we had grown up in. He had been 7 years old when I had taught him to ride a bicycle on the long, flat driveway of that house. He had been 12 years old when I had driven him to his first dance at the country day school we had both attended, and he had been 17 years old when I had given him, in the parking lot of that same school after his high school graduation ceremony, a small paperback edition of a book my biological mother had given to me, which I had not known, at the time, was a book my biological mother had given to me. I had thought, at the time, that the book had been given to me by Marguerite. I had been wrong about that. I had been wrong about a great many things. I had not known any of them at the time that I had been wrong about. I would begin to know them that Friday evening in late May, in the 18 seconds during which an 84-year-old woman in a navy silk dress and a single strand of cultured pearls walked across the marble floor of my parents' ballroom to drop to her knees in front of my chair. I want to tell you first what my father had said. He had raised his glass at approximately 8:13 p.m., after the small 12-piece string orchestra had finished playing the third movement of a Schubert piano quintet, after my brother and Genevieve had walked together to the center of the ballroom, and after the maitre d' from the catering company had tapped a small silver fork against his own glass to bring the room to attention. My father had said, in the voice he had been using for the previous 40 years, to address rooms of 200 people who were waiting to hear him speak. Friends, family, distinguished guests. My wife Marguerite and I want to thank each of you from the bottom of our hearts for being here tonight to celebrate my son Lyndon, the only one of my 2 sons who has ever brought our family the pride that fathers in this country, in my generation, expected to be brought to them by their sons, and his beautiful fiancée Genevieve, who is, by every measure I have been able to take of her in the previous 14 months, the woman my son was meant to marry, and the woman who is going to one day inherit, alongside my son, the $80 million empire that I have spent my entire adult life building, brick by brick, contract by contract, project by project, for the family that I love. He had paused. The room had clapped. He had let the clapping continue for approximately 6 seconds. He had then raised his hand to ask for silence. He had said, "I would also like to take a moment while you are all gathered here to acknowledge my other son, Crawford, who has spent the previous 11 years of his adult life, since walking away from a generous position at the firm I built, demonstrating with admirable consistency that some men are meant to inherit empires, and some men are meant to fix the leaking faucets in the houses of the men who built them." The room had not, at first, reacted. The room had then, in the silence following the second sentence, begun to laugh. The laughter had begun small. A few uncomfortable chuckles from the back. A short barking sound from a man near the bar who had been my father's lifelong friend. The laughter had grown. By the time my father had set down his microphone and reached for his champagne glass, approximately 2/3 of the room had been laughing. The laughter was not cruel. The laughter was worse than cruel. The laughter was the kind of laughter that 200 people produce in a marble-floored ballroom when they have been given permission by the host of the evening to laugh at a man they have decided, on the basis of nothing more than the host's clear signal that he expects them to laugh, is the kind of man whose humiliation is going to be the price of admission to the rest of the party. I had not moved. I had not changed my facial expression. I had been holding the small dessert plate for my daughter Posy on my lap, and I had not in any visible way allowed the muscles of my face or the position of my body to communicate to her, or to anyone in the room, that the previous 14 seconds had affected me. My daughter May, who was 7 years old, who had been standing beside my chair, had reached over and taken my left hand in her right hand. She had not said anything. She had simply held my hand. She had held it the way a 7-year-old girl holds her father's hand when she has just seen something happen to him that she does not have the vocabulary to describe, but that she has understood, with the clean, uncomplicated clarity of a small child, was something that no father should have to have happen to him in front of his children. I had squeezed her hand once. My wife, Brielle, had leaned toward me from the chair on my left side. She had cupped her hand around the side of my face, as if to whisper a comfort to me. She had said into my ear, in a voice that I would later, in the privacy of the long, quiet drive back to our small rental house on Thomas Avenue, recognize as the voice of a woman who had been waiting for years for permission to say exactly the sentence she was about to say, "You have always been the embarrassment of this family, Crawford. You earned this. Sit there and take it." I had not turned to look at her. I had not answered her. I had simply, very gently, lifted Posy off my lap, set her on her own chair beside May, and stood up. I had stood up because I had decided, in the approximately 3 seconds after Brielle had finished speaking, that I was going to walk out of the ballroom, drive my 2 daughters home to the small rental house on Thomas Avenue, and never set foot in my parents' house again for the remainder of my natural life. I had not gotten to the first step. The east doors of the ballroom had opened. A woman had walked in. She was approximately 80 years old. She was small, perhaps 5 feet 2 inches tall, perhaps 115 pounds. She had short white hair cut close to her head, in the style of a woman who had spent her adult life as the wife of a senior executive and had no interest, in her 9th decade, in cultivating any further opinion of her appearance from anybody other than herself. She was wearing a navy silk dress with 3/4 sleeves, a single strand of cultured pearls, and small navy leather flats. She was holding a black wooden cane in her right hand. She was accompanied by a tall, gray-haired man in a charcoal suit, who I would later learn was named Beaufort Pendergast, who was carrying a black leather attaché case in his left hand and his own folded hat in his right hand. The 2 of them stopped, approximately 12 feet inside the doorway. The woman looked across the ballroom. The room had, by the time her eyes had reached the back wall, already gone silent. She did not look at my father. She did not look at my mother. She did not look at my brother. She did not look at Genevieve, or at the catering staff, or at the orchestra, or at any of the approximately 200 guests who had, by that point, all turned in their chairs to watch her. She looked directly at me. She held my gaze for approximately 4 seconds. Her face did not move, in any way I could see in those 4 seconds. Then she began to walk toward me. She walked slowly. She walked using the cane. She walked, by my later count, approximately 75 feet across the marble floor of the ballroom, past my father, past my mother, past the orchestra platform, past the catering tables. She did not stop until she was approximately 3 feet in front of my chair. She stood there for an additional 6 seconds. She did not speak. She looked at me the way a person looks at a photograph she has not been allowed to look at, for any reason, for 38 years. She then handed her cane to the gray-haired man beside her. She lowered herself, slowly and carefully, to her knees on the marble floor of the ballroom. She placed both of her hands over her face. She began, in the absolute silence of 212 people, to weep. She said into her hands, "Oh God, they told me you died." I did not move. I did not speak. My daughter May, beside me, was still holding my left hand. My daughter Posy, on the chair on my right, had begun to cry quietly. The woman in front of me, on her knees, continued to weep into her hands for approximately 22 seconds. The gray-haired man beside her did not move to help her up. Nobody in the room did. My father had, at approximately the 8-second mark, opened his mouth to speak. He had closed it again at approximately the 11-second mark. He had not opened it again. At approximately the 23rd second, the woman on her knees lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were red. Her face was wet. She looked up at me from the marble floor. She said, in a voice that was small and clear and that did not waver, "Crawford, my name is Constance Ballantyne Heatherton. I am the mother of your father, Augustin Heatherton, who drowned in Charleston Harbor when you were 2 years old. I am your grandmother. I have been your grandmother for the entire 40 years that you have been alive. I have not, until 22 seconds ago, been allowed to see you, because the man who has been raising you as his own son for the previous 38 years, your father's first cousin, the man who inherited my son's home in Charlotte after the accident, told me that you had drowned with my son, and told me, until a fishing boat captain in Charleston confessed otherwise on his deathbed 9 weeks ago, that I had no living grandchild left in this world." She paused. She turned her head very slightly toward my father. She said, without raising her voice, "Halston, I have come to take my grandson home." My father did not say anything. He had, by the time my grandmother had finished speaking, sat down in his chair at the head table. He had set his champagne glass on the white tablecloth in front of him. His hand had not been steady when he had set it down. My mother, the woman I had, until approximately 90 seconds earlier, believed to be my mother, had not moved from her own chair beside my father. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloth in front of her. She was looking, with a fixed, unmoving stare, at the back wall of the ballroom, in a way that I would later understand to have been the way a woman looks at a wall when she has been preparing herself, for the previous 38 years, for the possibility that the wall might one day be all she has left. The man with the black leather attaché case stepped forward. He said, "My name is Beaufort Pendergast. I am an attorney admitted to practice in the state of South Carolina and a former senior investigator with the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division. I have been retained by Mrs. Ballantyne Heatherton for the past 9 weeks to investigate, document, and validate the claim she has just stated. I have, in this case, a sworn deathbed affidavit signed by a man named Carlisle Bowen, a retired commercial fishing captain who passed away in a hospice in North Charleston 9 weeks ago, attesting to his recovery of a 2-year-old male child from the open water off the south shore of James Island on a Sunday afternoon 38 years ago this past August. I have a sworn statement from Mr. Bowen's son, the only other living witness, confirming that the child was delivered by Mr. Bowen and one other crew member to the residence of Mr. Halston Heatherton in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the Tuesday morning following the recovery." He paused. He said, "I have, additionally, the results of 2 independent DNA comparisons, conducted under chain of custody protocol by accredited laboratories in Atlanta and Charleston, respectively, between samples voluntarily collected from Mrs. Ballantyne Heatherton, samples collected from preserved tissue from the body of her son, Augustin Heatherton, and samples collected from a coffee cup left by Mr. Crawford Heatherton at a public coffee shop in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte, approximately 3 weeks ago. The samples match at the level of grandmother to grandson, with a confidence interval of 99.98%. He paused again. He said, "I am authorized, on behalf of my client, to inform this room that Mr. Halston Heatherton has been the subject of a parallel investigation, initiated by my client at the same time as the family investigation, into the systematic conversion of inheritance assets that were legally bequeathed to the estate of Augustin Heatherton, in trust for the benefit of his sole surviving heir, Crawford Heatherton, upon the death of Augustin Heatherton in the harbor accident 38 years ago. That investigation has, as of approximately 72 hours ago, been formally turned over to the United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina, who is, I have been informed, currently reviewing materials in coordination with the FBI's Charlotte Field Office." The ballroom did not make a sound. I looked down at my grandmother, who was still on her knees on the marble floor in front of my chair. I looked at May, who was still holding my left hand. I looked at Posey, who was still crying quietly. I looked at my wife Brielle, who had gone very still on her chair beside me, and who was now looking at my father across the ballroom with an expression I had never previously seen on her face. I knelt down on the marble floor in front of my grandmother. I took her 2 small hands in mine. I said, "It is all right. I am here. I did not die." She began to weep into our hands. I held her hands. I did not let go of them for the next 9 minutes. I will tell you the rest of the story in summary, because the rest of the story is, as I write this, still unfolding, and because the rest of the story will, in many of its details, be the subject of legal proceedings that I am not yet at liberty to describe in full. The man I had spent 40 years believing to be my father, Halston Heatherton, was arrested at his lakefront estate by federal agents on a Wednesday morning approximately 3 weeks after the engagement party. The federal indictment, returned by a grand jury sitting in the Western District of North Carolina, contained 28 counts, including wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, conversion of trust assets, and structuring transactions to evade federal reporting requirements. The total amount of inheritance assets that he had, over the course of the previous 38 years, converted from my biological father's estate to his own personal use, was approximately $93 million in present value, of which approximately $52 million had been used to build Heatherton Capital from a small two-person residential development firm into the $80 million real estate empire he had repeatedly described, at public events over the previous 2 decades, as the unblemished product of his own professional excellence. The remaining $41 million had been spent on the lakefront estate, his 2 homes in Charleston and Aspen, the country club memberships, the private school tuitions, the luxury automobiles, the household staff, and the small constant stream of personal indulgences that he had been, his entire adult life, very careful to attribute to the success of the firm rather than to the source of the original capital that had built it. The federal prosecutors have offered him, through his attorneys, a plea agreement contingent on full restitution. His attorneys are, as I write this, in active negotiation. The likely sentencing range, if a plea is reached, is between 12 and 15 years in federal custody. Marguerite, the woman who had, until approximately 2 months ago, been the only mother I had ever known, was not indicted in the initial wave of charges. She received a target letter from the United States Attorney's Office a few weeks after Halston's arrest. Her own attorney is currently negotiating a non-prosecution agreement in exchange for her full cooperation against Halston. She has not, since the morning of his arrest, attempted to contact me. I have not contacted her either. I do not know whether I will. My brother Lyndon, who had not known about any of it, broke off his engagement to Genevieve Wexler Pratt within 72 hours of our father's arrest, on the grounds that the foundation of the family Genevieve had been marrying into had turned out to be substantially different from what she had been told. Lyndon then drove from Charlotte to my small rental house on Thomas Avenue, on a Saturday morning approximately a month after the engagement party, and he sat with me on the small front porch for approximately 3 hours, and he asked me, very quietly, whether there was any chance the 2 of us could, over the course of the rest of our lives, build something between us that would not be poisoned by what our parents had done. I told him there was. We have been trying, slowly, ever since. We are not all the way there yet. We are closer than we were. My grandmother, Constance, who had been a widow for the previous 15 years, since the death of her second husband, a Charleston pharmaceutical executive named Bertram Ballantyne, whose own fortune had been valued, at his death, at approximately $400 million, has, over the previous several months, formally established a trust in my name, funded by a substantial portion of her personal estate. The trust is irrevocable. It is administered by a small group of attorneys and trustees in Charleston, all of whom answer, ultimately, to me. The terms of the trust are not the subject of this account. The general shape of it is that I will, for the remainder of my natural life, not need to worry about money. I have not yet decided what to do with the trust. I have, in the months since the engagement party, kept running my small handyman business in Plaza Midwood and Noda. I have kept my 40 residential clients. I have kept the 2010 Ford F-150. I have kept, on the wall above the small desk in my one-bedroom office in our garage, the photograph that May took of Posey and me at the State Fair in Raleigh on a Saturday afternoon, approximately a year and a half ago, in which I am holding Posey on my shoulders in front of a Ferris wheel, and in which Posey is laughing in a way that, even now, I cannot look at for very long at any given time without having to stop and find a reason to be in another room for a few minutes. My wife, Brielle, moved out of our rental house on Thomas Avenue approximately 3 weeks after the engagement party. She moved into the home of a former college roommate in South Charlotte. She filed for divorce approximately a month after that, citing irreconcilable differences. Her attorney attempted, in the initial filings, to claim a portion of the trust that my grandmother had established for me. Her attorney was informed by my attorney that the trust was funded entirely with separate property assets gifted to me by a biological relative, that the trust had been established after the date of our marital separation, and that, under North Carolina equitable distribution law, the trust was not marital property under any colorable theory. Her attorney did not press the claim further. Our divorce was finalized approximately 7 weeks after she had filed. She did not seek primary custody of our daughters. She did not, in any of the conversations my attorney had with her attorney, indicate that she had ever intended to. May and Posey live with me, full-time, in a small 4-bedroom craftsman bungalow in Plaza Midwood that I bought, with funds from the trust, approximately 2 months ago. The house has a front porch with a swing on it, a small backyard with a wooden fence, and a kitchen that gets the morning sun. The girls have their own bedrooms. My grandmother, Constance, comes to stay with us on the first weekend of every month. She has the small guest bedroom on the first floor. She and May have been, in the months since the engagement party, working their way through a small set of books that Constance had kept in a box in her attic in Charleston for the previous 38 years that had been intended for the grandchild she had been told she had lost. The box had contained 11 books. May has read 4 of them so far. The 5th book is the small paperback edition I had given to Lyndon in the parking lot of our country day school 19 years ago. That book had been a gift from my biological mother, Cosette, to my biological father, Augustin, on the occasion of my 2nd birthday, approximately 3 months before they had drowned. My grandmother had given the book to Halston at the funeral, with the instruction that it be set aside for me when I was old enough. Halston had, instead, given it to Marguerite, who had, 11 years later, given it to me, and told me that it had been a gift from her. I had given it to Lyndon 19 years ago. Lyndon had returned it to me, on the small front porch of the house on Thomas Avenue. On the Saturday morning he had come to ask me whether we could rebuild what our parents had broken. The book is, as I write this, on the bedside table in my older daughter May's bedroom. It is the next book she is going to read with her great-grandmother. I think she will be ready for it next month. That is enough. That is more than enough. I am sitting on the back porch of the small craftsman bungalow in Plaza Midwood on a Sunday evening in mid-November. May and Posey are in the kitchen with my grandmother, making a bundt cake from a recipe my biological mother Cosette had handwritten on a small index card, which my grandmother had kept in the box in her attic for the previous 38 years. I can smell the cake. I can hear my daughters laughing. I can hear my grandmother, who is 84 years old, and who has been speaking to my daughters for the previous 43 minutes about her own daughter-in-law, my biological mother, whom my daughters have been listening to her describe with the kind of careful, patient attention that small children give to old women who are telling them, for the first time, about people the children have never been allowed to know existed. My grandmother is going to live to see May graduate from college. I have decided this. I do not control whether it is going to happen. I have decided it anyway. I have decided it because, for the first time in 40 years of my life, I am sitting on a back porch on a Sunday evening, and I am not the embarrassment of any family I have ever been a member of. I am the head of one. I am sitting in a chair on my own back porch. I am the grandson of a woman who has been waiting 38 years to see me. I am the father of 2 daughters who have been waiting their entire short lives to live in a house in which their father is not the man people laugh at. I am the brother of a man who is, slowly, becoming somebody I can call my brother again, and who is in some quiet way that neither of us has the language to describe yet, also the man my biological father would have wanted him to be. I am not the pathetic failure who was sitting in the corner. I never was. I had only been told I was. I had paid the price for 38 years of being told I was, in the only currency I had, which was the currency of believing, against the small steady evidence of every honest thing I had ever done with my own hands, that the men and women who had told me what I was had told me the truth. They had not. The truth had walked into a marble-floored ballroom in a navy silk dress and a single strand of cultured pearls at approximately 8:14 p.m. on a Friday evening in late May, and the truth had dropped to its knees on the marble floor, and the truth had wept into its hands, And the truth had told me 7 words that I had spent the previous 38 years of my life waiting, without knowing I had been waiting to hear. The 7 words had been, "Oh God, they told me you died." I had not died. I had never died. I had only been waiting for somebody, anybody, in the entire world, to walk into the room and tell the truth out loud. She had walked in. She had told it. I am going to ask you something harder. I want you to think, for 1 full minute before you scroll, about the worst thing that any member of your own family has ever said to you in front of other people. It does not have to be the worst thing they ever said to you in private. It has to be the worst thing they said to you in front of other people. In front of cousins. In front of in-laws. In front of strangers in a restaurant. In front of your own children. I want you to remember the exact sentence. I want you to remember the exact room. I want you to remember the way your face felt in the moment you understood that the people around you had been given permission, by the person who said it, to think less of you for the rest of the evening. Now I want you to ask yourself a single question. Has anybody in that room, in any of the years since, ever apologized to you for what was said? Has anybody ever brought it up again, on their own, without you bringing it up first? If the answer is no, and the answer is, for most of the men reading this, almost always no, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to forgive yourself for staying silent in that room. The men who stay silent in rooms like that are not weak. They are men who have understood, on a level the people around them have not yet understood, that some humiliations have to be carried alone for a long time before the truth finds its way into the room and tells the people who humiliated you that they were wrong. The truth has not yet found its way into your room. It may never find its way. The men who can carry a humiliation that the truth never publicly corrects, those are the strongest men I know of. You are one of them. Drop 1 word in the comments tonight. Any word. I will read every single one.